I would stab him up or something right now. Like, I'm just being honest with you. I would really, really hurt this
Those
guy.
words are that serious to you?
Yeah, those are serious to any real. Like, that's like that's I don't know. That's terrible.
Horrible.
Horrible. What happened to that kid? That kid minding his business. Beautiful kid. Minding his business, making his music with his fans. Horrible what they did to that kid. I'm gonna be honest with you. If somebody told me suck my right now in this hallway or something like that, I would stab him up.
Fat Joe might seem like just another chart-topping artist with a larger-than-life persona, but let's spill some tea. Those wild street stories you've heard from him, most people think they're pure cap, just hype to build his reputation.
But I had a friend that his brother was like the biggest drug kingpin in the biggest, right? And me and him was super cool.
Sure, some folks might call his stories cap, but Joe's moves, whether on the mic or in the streets, always seemed calculated to maintain that larger-than-life rep. Love him or hate him, he knows how to sell the image, blending just enough truth and swagger to keep people talking.
You're the only one fighting 50 back, man. What's good with that, man?
I tell him, suck my.
But hold up, what if I told you that every single one of them is true? Yep, Fat Joe wasn't just talking, he was out there walking the walk.
I'm like, I didn't know it was him. And I'm like, man, who the F you talking to, bro? Do you know this? He said, y'all family, I your mother. I said, huh?
Don't just take my word for it. Tony, Yayo, and 50 Cent have dropped some major receipts, backing up that Joe was really about that life back in the day.
The entire beginning of my career, I was up against the leverage of Murder Inc. So my whole beef with Fat Joe was really his loyalty.
This ain't your typical rapper flexing for clout. Fat Joe's street cred runs deep, and the receipts are juicier than a primetime reality show. Let's dive in. From whispers of ties to notorious crews to rumors of business dealings that never made the headlines, Fat Joe's story is steeped in controversy. Let's pull back the curtain on Fat Joe, a man whose life reads more like a gangster movie than a rap career. While many fans saw him as just another chart-topping artist, there's a whole underground story about Joe that doesn't make the headlines. Here's the kicker. Some people think it's all a front, just tales to build a bad boy image. But what if the truth is even crazier than the rumors?
You know, people try to us every day. So it was like another guy who tried to kill us. Like, right?
Legends like Tony, Yayo, and 50 Cent have vouched for Joe's street credentials, and that's saying something. These guys aren't handing out compliments like candy. Yayo once said Joe was the real deal, and 50 Cent, who's notorious for beefing with Joe, has admitted in interviews that Joe had serious respect in the streets. This isn't just industry hype, it's the kind of grudging acknowledgement that hints at something bigger. Joe wasn't just rapping about the thug life, he was living it.
You've said on my show before that the Terror Squad beef was probably the most serious beef that G-Unit ever had.
He had some, he had them Bronx crazy Spanish with him.
But here's where things get controversial. There's a growing conspiracy that Joe's street rep is even more layered than it seems. Some insiders claim his connections weren't just local. They might have extended to larger criminal networks. The whispers suggest ties to powerful figures in the Bronx and beyond, people who operated in the shadows and pulled strings most of us will never see. Was Joe just a talented rapper caught in the crossfire of his environment, or was he actively running in circles that would make headlines today?
Pete is a real I gotta give it up. The realest beef was with Fat Joe and them.
We out here in the trenches.
Joe's stories about gang wars, shootouts, and his time running the Terror Squad have always been polarizing. Critics argue he exaggerates for clout, but time and again, other industry heavyweights have backed him up. There's talk of a near-fatal shooting he narrowly survived, not to mention tales of Joe allegedly orchestrating moves that went beyond music beefs and into real street-level retribution.
There's nothing more scary than having a guy on your shooting at you 8 times in 2 days?
Think about it. How many rappers have industry insiders outright confirming their gangster status? While most rappers embellish their backgrounds, Joe's history is like an open secret that no one in the know dares to outright deny. Could it be that Joe wasn't just a participant in street culture, but an architect of it in the Bronx? Here's where it gets wild. Some conspiracy theories suggest Joe's influence in the streets ran so deep that it bordered on untouchable. There are whispers, totally unverified but intriguing, that Joe wasn't just a gang leader. he might have been connected to figures that even law enforcement hesitated to touch. Allegations of corruption, backdoor deals, and even connections to international crime rings pop up in hushed tones when Joe's name comes up in certain circles.
I had a friend that his brother was like the biggest drug kingpin in the biggest, right? And me and him was super cool.
Could this explain why, despite the chaos surrounding his name, Joe has largely avoided major legal trouble? Is it just luck, or was he playing a chess game so advanced that even his rivals couldn't keep up? Some fans believe Joe's longevity in the industry and the streets is no coincidence. Even 50 Cent, who went head-to-head with Joe in one of the most talked-about beefs of the early 2000s, has dropped subtle hints that Joe's reputation wasn't just hype. Their feud was explosive, and the diss tracks were scathing. But behind the bars, there was a level of mutual respect that couldn't be ignored. 50 once said in an interview that, while he had no love for Joe, he couldn't deny the man's ability to command loyalty and respect in the streets. Although I worked for everything I got, although I never extorted nobody, although I didn't bully nobody, 50 said, I had the persona of New York Suge Knight. Like, you know, people feared Fat Joe and the Terror Squad in that way, you know? So for 50 Cent talking about Fat Joe in the same city, the funeral homes was making bids. Tony Yayo doubled down on this, painting a picture of a Fat Joe who wasn't just respected but feared. He described Joe as a man who didn't need to broadcast his power because everyone already knew. And when Yayo talks about fear, you know it's real. He's been around enough to know what's legit and what's smoke and mirrors. Yayo says, yo, the realest beef was with Terror Squad. He was a real N, I gotta give it up. The realest beef was with Fat Joe and them, we outside. So where does that leave us? Is Fat Joe the real deal, or is he just a master storyteller with a knack for making his past sound larger than life? The evidence suggests there's more to Joe's story than he lets on, and the people who know him best aren't exactly rushing to deny it. Whether you believe the conspiracies or think it's all just a clever way to build a brand, one thing's for sure. Fat Joe's legacy is as controversial as it is fascinating. Fat Joe wasn't just a rapper. He was the architect of one of the most notorious crews in hip-hop history, the Terror Squad. Dubbed the Spanish G Unit, this wasn't just a group of artists looking to spit bars and climb the Billboard charts. The Terror Squad had a dual identity, part hip-hop collective, part street operation with a reputation that stretched far beyond New York's borders.
I would say Fat Joe and them.
The squad wasn't just about dropping hits. They carried the weight of their environment. Coming straight out of the Bronx, Joe and his crew brought the raw, unfiltered energy of the streets into the studio. Their music reflected their reality, but their reality wasn't just music. It was a mix of survival, ambition, and as some say, domination. This wasn't a crew afraid to get their hands dirty. Rumors of enforcers, extortion, and under-the-table deals swirled around them for years. The name Terror Squad wasn't just catchy, it was a warning. Known for blending business with a dose of intimidation, they were allegedly involved in street-level power plays that blurred the line between rap and real-life gangster moves. According to insiders, the squad's influence wasn't limited to hip-hop. Their reach extended into the streets, involving key players in both local and international circles, especially in places like the Dominican Republic, where the group allegedly held sway.
I don't want to say this to you, Yayo, but you know, if we ever really had beef, we was gonna go after Yayo.
Right.
Because he was the loudest mouth, he was the wild boy, he was the one dissing us at the highest level.
Stories of Fat Joe's leadership paint him as more than just a rapper with a squad. He was a kingpin-like figure, orchestrating moves and commanding loyalty. His crew didn't just represent him in the music game, they protected his interests everywhere else. Some claim the Terror Squad functioned almost like a street gang, with members ready to handle disputes with more than just words. The receipts for Fat Joe's street cred are as gritty as they get. One infamous tale involves Joe surviving a near-fatal shooting, a story that many fans initially dismissed as a fabrication until multiple industry insiders confirmed it. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a reminder that Joe's life was constantly balancing on the razor's edge between fame and danger. Joe's leadership wasn't just about protection, though. His rise to prominence brought with it a series of beefs that could have derailed his career, or ended it entirely. The Terror Squad went to war with some of the biggest names in New York's hip-hop scene, and Joe didn't flinch. These weren't just lyrical battles. In an era when beef often spilled into the streets, the stakes were life and death.
All my Spanish niggas in the Bronx, what I realized is them niggas are just a different kind of breed. Dominican, Puerto Rican, Ecuadorian, Mexican, they just, the Dominican, Puerto Rican niggas, they just another type of breed. They would have died for Joe.
Critics have questioned how much of Joe's story is truth and how much is myth-making, but time and time again, the accounts line up. The stories of him running the Terror Squad like a boss, getting shot, and beefing with rap royalty have been corroborated by multiple voices in the industry. Even Tony Yayo and 50 Cent, who aren't exactly Joe's best friends, have admitted the man's rep was no joke. And then there are the darker accusations, the ones that never made it into mainstream headlines but live on in whispered rumors, tales of backdoor deals, street-level retaliation, and even whispers of MDR charges have added to the mystique surrounding Joe's reign. Some insiders suggest that the Terror Squad was more than just a collective of rappers. It was a shadowy operation blending music, money, and muscle in ways that the industry wasn't ready to admit.
You know what I say all the time? I'll trade Rich Player, my right-hand man, for Tony Yayo. I'll give Rich Player the G-Unit. Give me Tony Yayo. Let him be Terror Squad. That's one loyal mother.
Today, the Terror Squad name might not carry the same weight it did in the late 90s and early 2000s, but its legacy is undeniable. Whether through their music or their street reputation, the crew left an indelible mark on hip-hop culture. For Fat Joe, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, his leadership of the squad solidified his place as one of the most respected names in the game. On the other, it painted a target on his back, both from rivals and the law. At the end of the day, the Terror Squad wasn't just about music. It was about power, survival, and respect. In Fat Joe, he wasn't just dropping hits, he was running the show. Whether you believe every story or think some of it is exaggerated, there's no denying that Fat Joe and the Terror Squad helped define an era where hip-hop and the streets were one and the same. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of Fat Joe's infamous feuds, because no real gangster story is complete without a series of high-stakes beefs that could have ended in bloodshed. And trust me, Joe wasn't just exchanging bars, he was playing a dangerous game in a city where rap grudges often escalated beyond the mic. The most notorious of Joe's beefs was with none other than 50 Cent, the man who thrived on chaos and controversy. Their feud wasn't just a war of words, it was a collision of two rap powerhouses, G-Unit and Terror Squad. Both crews had their own legacies, reputations, and armies of loyalists, and when those worlds clashed, the tension was palpable.
The Terror Squad beef was probably the most serious beef that G-Unit ever had.
He had some, he had them Bronx crazy Spanish with him,
Tony Yayo, a key player in 50's camp, once admitted that Fat Joe was the real deal. Coming from someone in G-Unit, that's a big deal. This wasn't just about rap bravado. Joe's name carried weight in the streets. Both crews were known to have members with real criminal ties, and when diss tracks turned into veiled threats, people started holding their breath. Let's not forget, 50 was notorious for stirring the pot, and Joe wasn't the type to back down. Their feud peaked during the 2005 MTV Video Music Awards, where their mutual disdain boiled over in a series of onstage jabs and behind-the-scenes drama. According to some insiders, security had to be tightened because the tension wasn't just for show. It was the kind of hostility that, in another time and place, could have turned violent.
Tony Yayo, super loyal. He stood by 50, and if 50 did anything wrong or 50 was to do anything wrong, Tony Yayo stood there.
While his beef with 50 was loud and messy, Fat Joe's simmering rivalry with Jay-Z was more of a Cold War. Both men were titans in their own right. Jay, the king of Brooklyn, and Joe, the Bronx Don. Though they rarely exchanged public shots, the tension between them was well known in industry circles. The root of their beef? Power and dominance. In a city like New York, there was only room for one top dog. And while Jay's rise seemed unstoppable, Joe was carving his own path. Rumors swirled about behind-the-scenes power struggles, unspoken territorial lines, and even shady deals involving mutual associates. Insiders suggest that while the two eventually made peace, their rivalry represented a clash of two very different worlds. Jay's polished corporate takeover of hip-hop and Joe's raw street-oriented hustle. Fat Joe's beef wasn't limited to the heavyweights. He had his fair share of run-ins with smaller artists who questioned his street credibility or tried to make a name for themselves by coming at him. But Joe wasn't the type to let a diss slide. Whether it was responding on tracks or sending a message through his squad, he made sure his name stayed untouchable. One of the most talked about incidents was Joe's fallout with Cuban Link, a former Terror Squad member. The split wasn't just a professional one, it was deeply personal, with accusations of betrayal and even physical altercations. For fans, it was a glimpse into the high-stakes drama that often surrounded Joe's inner circle. What made Joe's beef so dangerous wasn't just the personalities involved, it was the era they happened in. The late 90s and early 2000s were a volatile time in hip-hop, especially in New York. The shadow of Biggie and Tupac's tragic deaths loomed large, and everyone knew that rap beefs could quickly turn deadly. Today, Joe and many of his former rivals have buried the hatchet, but the stories of those beefs still linger. They're a reminder of an era when hip-hop wasn't just music, it was a battlefield. And while Fat Joe may be known now for his charisma and chart-topping hits, his past tells a story of a man who fought to earn his place in the game, even when the stakes were life and death. Whether it was standing toe-to-toe with 50 Cent or navigating the icy tensions with Jay-Z, Fat Joe's beefs weren't just entertainment, they were survival. And if there's one thing we've learned, it's that in the world of hip-hop, survival isn't for the faint of heart.
Every day I had to fight 20 guys. And then my best friend, he was black. His name was Leonard. My moms would cook for him every day, take care of him. And one day they came up to him and they was like, yo, why you be with the Puerto Ricans?
Joe's claims about being at war with half of New York sound like something out of a movie, but those who were there will tell you it was very real. He's talked about running the streets while simultaneously climbing the hip-hop ladder, and even his biggest critics struggle to deny the consistency in his stories. According to old school legends, Joe wasn't just a guy who rapped about the streets. He was someone who lived and breathed them. Take, for instance, the stories about him getting shot. For years, people dismissed it as just another exaggerated rapper tale, but multiple Terror Squad members have corroborated the incident, painting a picture of a chaotic time when Joe was living with one foot in the rap game and the other in the underworld.
Fat Joe's a real one.
100%.
Listen. Them Spanish Bronx, get busy.
Yeah.
Pistol Pete and them Pistol Pete, get busy.
If you want proof, look no further than archival footage from the 90s. These clips show a younger Fat Joe moving through the industry with an unmistakable aura of confidence. He wasn't just another rapper trying to get noticed. He was already someone people knew not to mess with. In interviews and behind-the-scenes footage, you can see how others treated him, often with a mix of respect and caution. But here's the thing. The more incredible Joe's stories sound, the harder it is for some people to believe them. The idea of a rapper who was simultaneously running a music career and managing real street business feels almost too cinematic to be true. Critics have accused him of embellishing details, claiming that some of his tales are just too convenient. What really sets Joe apart is his boss mentality. He wasn't just another artist trying to make it big. He was someone who commanded respect in both the music industry and the streets. Whether it was negotiating record deals or squashing beef with a combination of diplomacy and force, Joe knew how to navigate both worlds.
I like to tell the people home, I feel so safe tonight with all this police protection courtesy of G-Unit.
This duality, being a rap star and a street figure, has always been a source of fascination and controversy. It's why people are so divided about him. On one hand, he's a celebrated hip-hop icon who's delivered countless hits. On the other hand, he's a man whose past is shrouded in mystery, with rumors and legends that make him seem larger than life. At the end of the day, the debate about Fat Joe's authenticity is part of what makes him so intriguing. Whether you believe his stories or think they're just marketing hype, there's no denying that he's left an indelible mark on hip-hop. His name still carries weight, not just because of his music, but because of the legacy he built, one that straddles the line between fact and fiction. For every skeptic who questions his past, there's a fan or insider who says, Joe wasn't lying. And that, perhaps, is the greatest testament to his legacy. The fact that even decades later, people are still trying to figure out where the truth ends and the legend begins. One person on the internet wrote, I didn't know Fat Joe had such a tough life growing up. He's the real been doing hardcore gangster rap from day one, representing his real life. So was Fat Joe one of the most feared thugs of his time? From the looks of it, yeah. Whether it was his position as the head of the Terror Squad or his no-holds-barred feuds with rap's elite, Joe wasn't the type to back down. And love him or hate him, his legacy in hip-hop will always have that edge of danger that only a few can claim. Want to really feel the vibe? Cue those gritty 90s clips of Joe rolling deep with his crew, the ones where you can almost feel the tension in the air. Because that's the real Fat Joe, not just a rapper, but a man who lived every word he spit.